From the Aishin Broadcast Studio, it's the Executive Spotlight.
Welcome to the AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today, my guest is Bill Wittenmyer from DealerOn. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here.
Appreciate you coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's dive right in.
Okay.
Let's talk about this. There's dealerships are struggling right now with their staff. I mean, they're having trouble finding and then from the performance from their salespeople and their managers.
Yeah.
You know, what can they do about that?
That's a great question, because not only are they struggling with staffing, we've got really great times, right? So it's this weird dichotomy where, sales are very good still, but we don't necessarily have the same professionals that are in the business that were prior to COVID. I think what's interesting about that is, in talking to a couple of managers in the last couple of months, when you talk about some of their staff, better part of 60 to 70% of their salespeople are all COVID or post-COVID. They don't know what the business, has generally been for the last 100 years, except for that very small period of time that was obviously very beneficial for us in the industry. Conversely, the sales managers that are above them and manage them, about 50% of them, based upon my conversations, are again that either COVID or post-COVID, so they don't have that experience either. So what makes it very interesting is you have these, I don't want to call them neophytes, but they are a little bit of a new generation in sales, but they don't have that experience in negotiation and, actually having to do a true sales piece as opposed to taking orders, et cetera. And then worse, the managers that are above them don't have that experience in coaching and counseling and giving kind of the best advice to go that way. So I think that provides for a little bit of an interesting dilemma, right? And I think that, what dealerships are going to need to look at is more training, whether that's in-house or whether that's bringing, outside influence in. But at least concentrating on the core basics. That $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 price range is going to be a really compact price range in the next few years in terms of offers, from the manufacturers, in both EV and traditional. And so when you don't have that much diversity between that offering, you're going to have to provide a much better sales experience to gain that product, space and getting that margin.
Yeah, I actually stopped at the dealership my son works at on Monday afternoon, and he was telling me the exact same thing. He said, we interview all these people. We're looking for people that are hungry salespeople. He says that I'm having trouble finding them.
Yeah.
I just can't. He's like, these guys look like they want to cry when I tell them to go out and present the numbers.
Right. Well, that's another thing. I mean, when you look at, I don't think as an industry we've done a great job in a lot. There are some really progressive dealers, but as an industry, we haven't done a really great job in terms of, creating that environment that's a more appealing, workplace. We still offer, it's a lot of money and this is great. But the reality is you're working every night, you're working every holiday. They're long hours. It's not easy. You still have this proposition of remote work is out there, and it's a heck of a lot easier to work from your house, in your PJs or sweats than to be out on the lot, sweating in 90-degree temperatures. So I think there's that. I think we need to look at, and of course, generational changes have happened in terms of what motivates people. Not everybody is motivated purely by the almighty dollar, and we have to look at that and alternatives that are better than that, whether it's additional time off or more flexible schedules, et cetera. But again, it's back to how do we get them to be professional salespeople? When you look at all the statistics that are out there and all the opportunity that's there, even the core basics of, like you said, going out and meet and greet in a professional presentation, that's still a lot to do. It's not necessarily natural to most people.
Yeah. Let's talk about another issue that dealerships are having right now. It's every business. Interest rates are historically high from the perspective of anybody who's under 40 years old. Yeah. Because, my whole life, interest rates, and you didn't even think about the interest rate.
Right.
If your credit was good, it was like, always going to be super low.
Right.
Mortgages were 2.5%. Yeah. Cars were 4%, and always an incentive rate.
Right.
Dealerships are struggling right now. Getting people into cars, at the current rates that are affordable is a difficult dilemma. What can they do about that?
It's a challenge, right? And it's a challenge going into your point, because for so long, the better part of 20 years, it was definitely single digits, and it was very low single digits, and a lot of time it was 0 or 0.9, to your point, with subvented rates. And then you've seen over the last year or so where, you're knocking on, 10% door on a new vehicle purchase, and certainly higher than that on a pre-owned. And that does pose a challenge. There's two challenges there. Number one, the affordability and what somebody's value get for that buy is diminished. And number two, you have the psychological effect of the consumer that's looking at that same thing, which is, geez, I had a mortgage rate that was at 3%. I've never paid more than 4% on a car loan, in my life. And now you're talking about more than double that. So there's two challenges there. I think education is one. The good news is the manufacturers are always going to come to what I would say the savior in some point, which is they're going to provide subvented rates. We're already seeing an increase in what's available inventory on the lots, and thus they need to move that inventory. So you're seeing certain manufacturers that are already starting to subvent the rates a little bit, which gives you an alternative. And those that have very good credit are always going to have very good options. I think where the real challenge is going to be is in that mid-tier to low-tier area, which is going to be really difficult. And you need really strong professionals in the finance department to be able to explain, have that, do that coaching and counseling, understand that this may be a path to a better way in a few years if they can repair their credit, et cetera. So I think there's a couple of things that they can do there.
Let's shift gears and talk about used cars. When I sold cars, you pretty much, the cars on the used car lot were the ones you took in on trade, and then whatever the used car manager's gut told him at the auction.
Yeah, true.
That's not working anymore. What can dealerships do to make sure that that they've got the cars that are going to sell in a timely fashion on their lots?
Yeah, that's a great question. Technology is always great. I think there's a lot of good product out there that helps managers look at trends and where that vehicle appraisal should be comparative to their market and national. So I think that's a huge step forward as opposed to the books that I used to use back in ancient days. But I think what else people need to look at is being very cautious of their inventory. To your point, the last few years it was basically take everything you could get because you're going to turn it very quickly because of inventory shortages, all the challenges that we've all been over a million times. But what is a great piece of advice we used is what the top 10 that sell new is what's going to sell used, and try to create your own stock program. Whatever manufacturer you're representing or manufacturers you're representing, what is selling for you in the new side, and you create your own stock plan on the pre-owned, and you have to religiously monitor that, and you have to go by those guidelines. All the technologies out there can really help streamline that as opposed to an old Excel sheet that we used to use. But use a stock plan, go by the stock plan, and then regiment yourself on the turn, because right now, It's been a lot of great time of vehicle increasing in value, which is really unheard of unless it's a collector, or at least maintaining value. That's not going to last forever, right? The big variable in life is it's always going to be variable. So, it's very easy to turn that inventory into a real problem if you're holding on it too long. So I would recommend a stock plan. Be religious to your stock plan. Make sure you're strong on your turn, and don't be afraid to let a vehicle go.
Let's talk about inventory, but from the customer's perspective, and I want to circle back to COVID too. Yeah. So during the COVID pandemic, cars were selling for over sticker. Yeah. Customers were they were buying anything they could get. They were paying a lot over sticker. Yeah. Now the prices have returned closer to normal, and we have these people that are sitting in vehicles where they paid so much money and they have so much negative equity. What type of solutions are out there to bring these people back into the car market?
That's a really good question. I literally just had this conversation this week with a very well-known dealer group and a general manager I've known for a very long time. And they had somebody that came in this last weekend that was $60,000 upside down in an EV. I won't say the manufacturer because it's not the manufacturer's fault, but at the end of the day, $60,000 up. I didn't think you could do that unless it was like an RV or a conversion van. That really blew my mind. And wow. I think, we've got a lot of headwinds there because you talk about several different things, almost like a perfect storm. Last few years, they were paying sticker or more in a lot of cases with market value add and limited inventory. Then you have historic interest rates now that are increasing on top of that. We were going much longer terms because we had to accommodate for those higher prices, and now interest rates, and that's like a triple threat. Yeah. And so now we're in these vehicles a lot more than normally would be. Number two, inventory's coming back and will continue to come back. That's not going to stop. And so the availability is there, which drives down that value. And then you have the interest rates where they're not paying as much towards the actual loan as opposed to the fees. So, I think it's going to be really difficult. I think we're going to have to look creatively on financing, leasing. I think banks are going to have to get a little bit looser in terms of what their advance is going to be and understand that. But then there's the other challenge, which is you have, right now, delinquencies are on the rise. That's not going down, again, because of the fraud that we talked about. So I think we're going to have to look at taking really value-add vehicles, some of these EV vehicles that are sitting on the lots a little bit longer, and the incentives that the manufacturers are putting on that, as well as the government incentives. I think you have to kind of combine those two, and that's where you can really solve some of the negative equity issue, and at the same time, move some of that EV inventory that's not moving as fast as we anticipated it would.
So that's a good idea.
Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcock's Media.
Another question that's kind of off topic, but there's another kind of squeeze that's going on right now, especially in like the buy here, pay here market. So like the individuals that kind of need that. Now you have the dealers that used to be able to use interest rate to deal with the risk that was there, but now because the interest that they're paying on their money is there, and they're limited by the state how much they can charge. That spread has gotten so tight. It seems like that industry is kind of like dying on the vine right now.
It's interesting because we saw really huge growth in that business, during COVID. Much like RVs and motorcycles and everything, there's a lot of disposable income, something to do with it. People were buying cars. And there was a lot of the mom and pops, a lot of single store, a lot of buy here, pay here, a lot of dirt lots, or what other term we want to do. And you're right, you're seeing kind of a contraction in that right now because the challenges are back to inventory, the expense of the inventory, the carry of the inventory, and then, as you mentioned, trying to get them financed and the amount of competitive nature that's out there. That's another thing. We talk about floor plan expense, not only for used cars, but new cars. That's a huge headwind for our industry that you have to plan for. I think the really progressive dealers are really looking ahead and saying, how can we negate this? But an example is that I've got dealer friends now that, they've got a $100,000 floor plan expense this month that they had a zero or a credit a year ago or 2 years ago, right? And that's a big swing when you come to expenses. And you've got to plan for that, right? A general manager's major job is being really a P&L person and being able to balance that statement. So I think that's another one of those things that boils down to good management, good process, making sure you have good quality turn, and making sure your inventory is right. You've really got to have it dialed in right now. And that's a big switch from where it was over the last couple of years. We could kind of go a little bit loose. And that's not negative on process. It's just we could get away with a little bit more. Now you're going to have to dial it in. You're going to have to tighten up and really kind of run within the rails.
Let's talk about technology. Every year at NADA, there's a lot of new companies and there's a lot of new technology. But since COVID, it kind of feels like there's not as much new stuff. Like it doesn't seem like there's like, wow, can't live without that.
Yeah.
But why do you feel like that might have taken place, and is that going to continue to be the way things go?
That's a really great point. NADA is always a fantastic place, and it's always full of excitement and rollouts. And you're right. I felt like certainly over the last few years that the rollouts are really enhancements of current stuff. When you talk about new technology or real new innovation, it's really low on the forefront. I think the biggest reason for that is a couple of things. One, all of the providers in our industry, ourselves included, really concentrate on, look, we had to shore up. I mean, the dealers were doing very well. That didn't necessarily translate over to vendors doing very well. In fact, in a lot of areas, it was the exact opposite. Dealers didn't need to spend a lot of money on advertising. They didn't need to spend a lot of money on digital advertising. They didn't need to spend a lot of money on any of those type of things. Data mining, you didn't need to data mine. The customers were there, and you didn't have the car. So when you look at all the different facets of the industry from a software or a vendor perspective, I think what you saw was everybody was conservative. I think everybody was just shoring up, let's make sure we provide great service to our existing. Let's see if we can gather some other new, customers along the way, but let's make sure we make it out of this strong and make sure we have a really good path afterwards. So with dealers not needing that innovation and not spending money on that, thus the vendors didn't spend money on innovation. But I think what you'll see in the coming year or two, I think you'll start to see that pick up. I think you'll start to see a need, again, inventory rise. Where is that next innovation going to be? What do we need to do? Where are we going to hit that next piece? We've talked about interest. We've talked about financing. We've talked about inventory. What kind of enhancements could come from a technological standpoint there? I'm going to be excited to see.
Let's talk about your new technology.
Sure.
Your new signals program.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, again, something that we really developed over the last year. you've got a lot of things happening now. You've got the degradation of cookies coming. So you really need to get that personalized shopping experience, but you're not going to have that technology that we kind of cheated with. And I use that in a good way over the last few years to be able to represent things to customers while they shop. And we really need to provide more of that Netflix type experience, right? You go to Netflix, you watch a couple of shows, they start to be able to put, a algorithm together that says, hey, you would like this, Brian, this fits like what you would like here. We want to do that same thing with automobile shopping and the digital shopping experience, where we can come back and present that personalized experiences out. Brian, you really like these light colors, and oh, by the way, you're really looking at a 4-cylinder with this kind of and these type of options inside. I want to be able to present that from the inventory that I have as a dealer or as that website provider. So that allows us to really target that customer with more of the right product at the right time for the right person.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned some new things coming in the next couple of years. In your and my career, I don't want to date us too much, but we saw websites, we saw internet leads, then it was CRMs, and then more recently it's everybody's doing recon, and that's important. And now it's tracking the vehicles, and there's we've seen a lot of new technologies. What do you think the next big shakeup's going to be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that we're looking at some shakeup in the DMS space. We've got some disruption there. And I think that's going to be good for everybody. I think that's going to force all the legacy providers to really enhance what they have. I think Techion's going to jump out there and show some people some new stuff. But look, you always need a rabbit to chase, and that's not a bad thing. So I think all the legacy providers will come up and rise to the occasion. And that's what I love about this business, not only from the manufacturer and the retail side, but the vendor side. It seems like you've got a lot of really good providers, and those providers tend to just keep chasing each other, and that pushes great innovation. I think that's really what we look for in a strong economy like ourselves.
Nice. Was there anything more you'd like to share with our audience today, Bill?
I'd love to see interest rates come down, but I think we're all in that same boat. I guess I would say this: what we need to do is something. What we can't do is lay back and do nothing in our industry. And we know what we have ahead of us. So let's be proactive. Let's work towards that. I feel confident that all the positive things that we've done will continue to go. Our business has done extremely well in the good and the bad times. We always seem to find a way to hit that curveball. So it'll be interesting to see how we navigate these next challenging waters, especially coming out of such a great era that we enjoyed over the last few years.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for this AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today, my guest has been Bill Wittenmyer from DealerOn. We hope to see you again on a future episode. This one's Over the Curb and Burning Gas.